Los invitamos a conocer su trayectoria.
Educador, aprendizaje digital, Flipped Classroom. Todo lo anterior define a Aaron Sams, fundador de Sams Learning Designs, Turnabout Learning y The Flipped Learning Network. Actualmente es profesor adjunto en St. Vincent College en La Trobe, Pensilvania. Galardonado con el Premio Presidencial 2009 a la excelencia en la enseñanza de matemáticas y ciencias. Coautor de Flip Your Classroom, Reach Every Student in Every Class Every Day y Flipped Learning, Gateway to Student Engagement. Aporta una perspectiva educativa única para cualquier tipo de público con experiencia en y las escuelas de origen público, privado, tanto cara a cara, en línea y la mezcla de ambientes de aprendizaje. Tiene un grado académico en bioquímica y una maestría en educación, ambos de la Biola University. Todo esto y más veremos a continuación con Aaron Sams. Movement, tecnología, pionero. Esto es lo que define a la perfección a John Bergman, considerado uno de los pioneros del Flipped Class Movement. De hecho, él coescribió el libro Flipped Classroom. Es el líder facilitador en tecnología en la Joseph Sears School, en Kenilworth, Illinois. Recibió en Estados Unidos de América el Premio Presidencial por la Excelencia en la Enseñanza de las Matemáticas y las Ciencias en 2002. Todo esto y más veremos a continuación con John Bergman.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. It's great to be here in Mexico City. I absolutely love this city, and I always forget that it's up in the mountains until I get up those stairs and I go, because there's no oxygen here. The nice thing is I used to live up in the mountains, so I know what that's like to watch other people do that and how funny it can be. But now I live at sea level, and so now I get to breathe hard when I get upstairs, but that's okay. Neither here nor there. Lots of great information here. That'll come back later. But what I would really like you to do is if you can take a moment, if you're interested in signing up for the newsletter that Jonathan Bergman and I put out, we would love to have you do that. And at the end of this presentation, we're going to select one of those names at random, and we're going to give you a couple copies of our book. One of each, I believe, and we even sign them for you. So while you do that and sign up, I need to do something else, because this is the many faces of the Flipped Classroom, and I need to get your many faces on my, so humor me here, everybody smile. All right, perfect, thank you very much. That will go on my Facebook page a little bit later today. But what I really want to talk to you about, was that enough time? You're okay? You got it? Okay, good. That was just a stall and have you guys have some fun. But I'm a teacher, and I kind of come by this naturally, and primarily because my mother was a teacher. And my grandmother was a teacher, and my aunts and uncles were all teachers. So this is the 1980s, obviously because of the sweater and how ugly it is, and my mom's haircut, lovely bow. But so I'm a teacher by nature. It's part of who I am. It's in my family. It's in my blood. My dad's mother was a teacher. She got her teaching certificate in 1944 in Colorado, and all of his sisters became teachers. So it's something that I love. It's something that I'm passionate about. But somewhere along the line when I started teaching is I started to notice some change. So I started teaching in the year 2000. And we're kind of in the middle of this transition as far as educational technology goes, and not even just educational technology, but just consumer technology. Cell phones had been around a while. Cell phones started to become smart, where they could take pictures. Students were now more interconnected. Wi-Fi was everywhere. Things were changing rapidly in the world around us, and I looked at myself, and I looked at my colleagues who were teaching on a regular basis. And some of us were, I think, moving along with the change, and some of us were not making that change very well. In fact, a lot of us had classrooms that still look like this. Now, a lot of us went to school in classrooms like this, and learning can take place. in classrooms like this. But all of the literature I was reading and all of the conference presentations were telling me that I should have a classroom that looked more like this. So, not a place where a teacher just stood up front and told students new information and they dutifully wrote it down, but a place where the students were active and engaged and interested in what was going on and participating actively in the learning process. My challenge as a teacher was that I didn't know how to do this. I went to school in a classroom that looked like this. And I then taught the way I was taught. So I taught my students in methods like this. But I knew I kind of wanted to make this transition here. So what I'm going to share with you today is how I went through my own transition as an educator to make the move, and how I did it without abandoning the required curriculum that I had to teach. Now, when I first started teaching, I taught in Southern California, in Los Angeles. My Spanish is horrible because the only Spanish I've ever really learned, I just picked up while I lived in Los Angeles. And so it's functional. I can order food, and that's about it. So that's why I'm not even attempting to use any Spanish with you, because it's very bad. But while I was there, I learned about standards. We had state standards in California, and that I was required to teach them. And what I found early on in my educational career is that I had a lot of material to teach, but I never had enough time to teach it. There was a certain amount that I had to cover, so I always had to send something home with my students. The content delivery, the instruction was done in class, and then when I wanted my students to practice what they had just learned, I had to often send that home with them as homework to be done outside of the classroom. And that was a challenge because what I realized is a lot of students were struggling to do the work outside of the classroom. Some students, they just didn't want to do it, but other students tried very hard and they were unsuccessful at it. And so I was always trying to come up with new ways to help meet the needs of my student, to still be able to cover all the material that I needed to in my class without abandoning any of this content. But I never quite had enough time to do it. So then in 2006, I moved to Colorado. We moved up to the mountains in Colorado from Los Angeles. And that's where I met my colleague, Jonathan Bergman. Now, he came and he spoke to you all last year. And the conference organizers were kind enough to invite me to give a presentation this year. So you get to see the tall, handsome one this year instead of the shorter one that you saw last year. So it's one of the perks of, microphone. I get to say whatever I want, So, but when we got to Colorado, John and I met, and we realized that we both kind of had the same struggle, where there was material to teach, but there was never enough time, and we wanted to get some class time back. So in 2006 and 2007, we started to use video in our classroom. And in the 2007-2008 school year, we simply did not do any more live direct instruction. No more live lecture. All of our lectures were delivered through videos that John and I made together. So the lectures which used to be done in school were now being done at home. And the homework which used to be done at home was now being done in school. So there's a change in the time and the place in which the instruction is given, and the time and the place in which the practice is done. So now the content delivery was being done at home. And what used to take lots of time in class was now compressed into a short video. And then the practice that was being done in class that was being done at home was now being done in class, and I realized I had all this class time to do a little bit of practice. And my students really didn't need that much time. And so I had to start to think about how I could reinvent my classroom to make better use of that class time. Now let me pause here for a minute and say that a lot of people, I think, misunderstand what a flipped classroom is. They think that I'm using video somehow in my class, so my classroom is flipped. Now, that's a great place to start. But if that was the case, I could just stop and walk off the stage right now and be done with my presentation. There you have it. Video in the classroom. That's a flipped classroom. Congratulations. It was nice to see you all. But obviously, I'm not going to do that. I still have 30 more minutes to go, right? So there's plenty more to talk about with Flipped Classroom. So let's talk about how you can reinvent your classroom time to bring value to your students. And I'll tell you my story about how I made that transition. Now, I started off, I would say, in a very teacher-centered environment that was very driven by the course content down here. And when I flipped my classroom, I think I moved a little bit. Probably to about right here. Because what I did is I gave some of the responsibility of the learning over to my students, saying, if you want to be taught, you have to make the choice to press the button, to press the play button so that you can view the content. Giving some autonomy to the students. And I moved just a little bit away from the content and letting the students kind of learn a little bit more about what they wanted to learn, but I still had the required curriculum to teach. Now, last time I was in Mexico, back in February, I was at a conference, and Mark Prensky was one of the presenters there. And I got to know Mark, and Mark is a big thinker. He's an innovative guy, and he advocates education way up in the corner here, very learner-centered and interest-driven, wants students to just learn what they're passionate about, and have it centered around the student, centered around the learner. And that's a great, I think, goal to move toward. But a lot of us, again, we still live in this world where there's required curriculum, required material that we're supposed to teach, and we have to learn to balance those things. So in my curriculum-driven class, what I started to do with my class time is give my students more opportunities, not just to practice what they had learned through the video, but to apply it in a new way. Take what they had learned and set it into, or use it in another setting. And then I realized, you know what, I still have class time because I got so much time back. Now I can have them maybe dive down deeper into some analysis of what they've learned. So as a science teacher, I had my students doing a lot more laboratory investigations and studying the world around them. It was pretty exciting to see some of these things happen. And then my students said, Mr. Sams, this is great. Can I do something new with what I've just learned? Can I learn how to make fireworks? Can I build a solar panel? Can I take all of this other information that I've learned and create something new that will benefit the world around me? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And I started looking at all of these things and I realized, you know what? I think I learned about this when I got my teaching certificate. When I got my master's degree in education, this looks a lot like Bloom's taxonomy. So if you've been in education for a while, you've probably seen this, where the less difficult cognitive tasks are down here, remembering and understanding. And we spend a lot of time down there, and very rarely do we get our kids up to the top. Because I spent so much time teaching new content, I had little time to get my kids involved in evaluating, creating new things. So by flipping my classroom, I was also able to flip Bloom's taxonomy. I spent less time on the remembering and understanding components, and more time in my class having them analyze, evaluate, and create. Now, there's still a certain amount of practice that students need to do, and that's fine. Worksheets are okay. You don't need to do them all of the time. But students need some time to practice and apply what they've learned before they can do some of these other things. So let's look at this idea of lecture-based instruction and how it applies into then a flipped classroom. Why the flipped classroom, I think, is a superior way than just lecture-driven instruction, like I'm doing right now, to be perfectly honest. There's a place for a lecture, but it should not be your primary means of instruction. I mean, think about it. I have ideas in my head right now that I'm turning into words in a language that I know how to speak. Now, some of you understand English, and so as those words go out into the air, they then vibrate the air around us, and those go into your ears. And you hear those words, and you say, those are words that I recognize and understand. Now, some of you do not speak English and don't understand English, so you have on a headset, and someone else is taking my words and translating them for you. And so those are then going into your ears. And then some of you are taking those ideas, you're thinking about them, and many of you are then writing them down. And we often encourage our students to do this. Write down what I'm saying. Take some notes so you can go back and study them later, and hopefully those notes then take permanent residence in your brain. That's our goal when we're giving these lectures. But there are a lot of assumptions we have to make. I have to assume that some of you understand English. And if you don't, I have to assume that the translators are doing an accurate job of translating my words so that you can hear them. I have to assume that you are physically capable of hearing. That might not be a valid assumption like we just saw from the video that we just saw. So, I mean, really, think about it. Wouldn't it be great if we could just take what's in the professor's head and put it directly on our page? I had some professors in college where they would just read their outline. Point A, topic 1. And they would just, it was like, can you just give me a copy of your outline so I don't have to write it down while you're saying it? I can just read it, maybe sleep in or something, you know? Or maybe, and if you talk to Mark Prensky, he wants us to be able to like take information out of people's brains and plant it in somebody else's brain. Now that's a little scary to me. I'm not sure I want that level of creepiness of people putting things in my head. But that would be a lot more efficient, and we could make a lot fewer assumptions. I mean, and look at this guy. He's not even looking at the teacher. He's looking out the window. There's a squirrel or a pretty girl or something out there that he's staring at. I don't know what it is, but he's not paying attention. And here's the thing. You got 30 students in a class. The teacher's driving the show. All this paper that's sitting on their desk, they got to fill all that out. They got to turn all that in. He's got to collect all that. And he's got to grade it all. Right? That takes a long time. And I hate grading papers. That is the worst part of teaching. I can't stand it. So I had to get away from this. I couldn't do it any longer. So I then started wondering, is there a better way? So John and I, we were talking, and we said, well, we've spent a year building this library of videos. Why does every student have to go through that at the same pace? Why does every kid have to do the same thing at the same time on the same day? And we realized that they don't. And so we took Benjamin Bloom's concept of mastery-based learning and applied it to our flipped chemistry class. So students would view video content when they were ready for it. They would bring their papers up to me when they were ready to have them checked off. And instead of collecting a big stack of paper, I would ask them a question or two. Explain number 4. What does P stand for in the ideal gas law? If they could have an intelligent conversation with me, check them off. Move on to the next thing. So instead of going through a massive pile of paper, the formative assessment, those quick little checks of whether our students understand or not, were now very conversational. And that saved me so much time and so much paper. I felt like I got my life back. I went home and I realized, wow, there's like 3 children in my house. I have kids. And who is this woman that lives in my house? And I have a wife. This is great. Who are these people? I sort of see them in passing. I look up from my pile of paper, and there they are at night. I never really got to know them. It was wonderful. So this really transformed my practice as an educator because it made me a lot more efficient. Now, it was hard work. Don't get me wrong. But it was worth it. So later on, you should go here. Take a picture. You can go back and check it later. Mastery check. We have a whole series. We did some work, John and I, with Edutopia on how to implement this mastery-based system in your classroom and this idea of formative assessment and asking students questions. You can see an article that we wrote there and a video later on. And if you didn't get the picture, get it from a friend. Moving on. So my journey then, by using mastery-based learning, moved me more towards a learner-centered approach because the students had the control over the pace at which they learned the content. Still very content-centered, but more student-centered than it was before. Now, as a science teacher, we talk a lot about inquiry, learning through investigation, learning through exploration, and going through the process of concept development. I was never very good at teaching that way. I was very good at transferring information, but I was not good at facilitating this process of inquiry. But after I flipped my class, I had all this time now to do new things in my class. I said, now I'm going to work towards becoming a better teacher using this model of inquiry-based learning. So I had students then doing scientific investigations, and then after they did that, using video. So instead of starting with video, start with an exploration, and then supplementing that with a video that I made for my students. So by moving to an inquiry-based model, that became very much more learner-centered and more interest-driven because the students were involved in the process of investigation and exploration, much more than they ever were in my class before. So another step towards Mark Prensky. Now, beyond that, I started to discover UDL, Universal Design for Learning. I don't know if the initials work in Spanish, but it's Universal Design for Learning. The idea behind this comes out of some research in Harvard. And the idea is we're going to meet the needs of all students. Instead of kind of aiming for the middle and hoping we get most of our students, we design for the fringe and everyone benefits. So this happens in architecture. Instead of building lots of steps that some people can't access, we now build ramps that everyone can access, whether you're a walking person or whether you access the building in a chair or whether you're somebody pushing a stroller with a little baby in it, you can still get up a ramp. So the same applies in education. If we design for the fringe, everyone benefits. So a lot of the principles of universal design for learning have to do with giving students some choice. So instead of requiring that all my students watch my videos, I gave them the option. You may watch my video, or you can learn it some other way. And instead of taking my test, my exam, you can take my test and my exam, or you can prove to me that you've learned it in some other way. Giving students choice and autonomy, I had more students than ever before actually buy into the fact that this class has value. No longer were they there to please me and to jump through my hoops, to do all of my assignments and check all the boxes of the things that had to be done in my class. They were finally there to learn. Now, it took some students a while to figure that out because they had been trained many, many years that do exactly what the teacher says, when the teacher says to do it, and you will get rewarded with points, and points mean good grades, and good grades mean happy parents, and happy parents mean good things in my life, and that's what I want, is good things in my life. But they weren't learning anything, and that was a problem. So I wanted to give students choice and focus on learning rather than just getting a grade or getting a score. So making that move, embracing universal design for learning, became a more learner-centered approach. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on project-based learning because we're already going a little bit long here. But project-based learning allowed my students then to, instead of just taking a traditional exam, and instead of learning in traditional ways, to explore the world around them through a project and still learn the required chemistry content. So giving my students even more choice to investigate things that they want to learn moved me one step closer to Mr. Prensky. Now, I'm going to take you into my classroom, and I want to show you what this looks like in practice, because it sounds a little crazy, and it looks a little crazy. So let's take 2 minutes and peek into my classroom. I'm Aaron Sams. We're here in Woodland Park, Colorado at Woodland Park High School. Flipped learning, I think, on a really basic level is taking what has traditionally been given in a lecture in terms of direct instruction and shifting that out of the class time and then using that recuperated time more wisely, more valuably to really meet the individual learning needs of students. The way I got started doing this is I just started recording my lessons live for my students who were missing class and posting those online for them as a resource. They get to access it when they want to, and that could be at 10 o'clock at night, it could be 6 o'clock in the morning, it could be on the bus to the soccer game. They have control of that. Students would watch those before they came to class, and then class time was work time, engaging in some higher order thinking, and so we didn't have to use our class time for direct instruction. We could shift that out of the class.
There's a site where we go to and we watch our podcast, and it has like all the units.
And during the class period, we're doing labs and applying the skills that we learned at home.
I wish more people would do the flipped classroom. I think it definitely works for every speed of learner.
If a student is a fast learner, they can go through the material as quickly as they want. The slower learners, the students who struggle, they have control of the rate at which they learn the material. So they can pause the teacher, they can rewind the teacher, they can view it multiple times if they need to. If everyone's not doing the same thing at the same time on the same day, my class looks a little chaotic. It looks like a three-ring circus of learning is what I call it. I also give them the option, if they don't want to take my test, to demonstrate their understanding some other way. So I have students making video games, writing comic books, creating art projects. So yeah, the sky's the limit. Whatever they want to do, as long as they can prove to me that they get it, that they're learning, that they understand these things, and it's good enough for me. There's a school in Michigan that has adopted this instructional model for all of their core classes. What they're seeing there is that their failure rates have gone from like in the 40% down to single digits. So that's pretty remarkable there. One of the concerns that educators are really wrestling with these days is the fact that we are preparing our students for jobs that don't exist yet. And I really see flipped learning as a tool that teachers can leverage to help students learn to think, learn to access information when they need it, and to be able to process it in a meaningful way. So I might not be training my kids for a specific job, but I'm giving them the tools, the ability to think and the process and the problem solve that they will need for whatever they end up doing. So I've been sharing with you my story of how I transitioned. So my flipped classroom took on many different faces. It started out with just using video as a teaching tool, moved to mastery-based learning, implementations of inquiry-based learning, universal design, project-based learning. It was a transition. It took me many years to make that transition, but all of those were forms of the flipped classroom. So you can flip without using mastery. You can flip without using inquiry. You can flip without using universal design. But these are all forms that it can take. And you will probably find yourself somewhere on this continuum. And that's completely fine. You don't have to be up here where Mark Prensky is. In fact, I kind of wish I had stopped about right there. I might have gone a little bit too far. So what I want to do now is, I was invited to talk this year, and but John happens to be here with me as well today. So I want to bring another face of the flipped classroom up to the stage. So let's welcome John. Thank you, John, for being here.
Did you really say that you were the tall, handsome one?
I am the tall, handsome one.
And I was the short, ugly one?
I didn't say ugly. You said that.
I think he said that.
I didn't say
Did he say
ugly.
I was the short, ugly one?
I think I called you old, but not ugly. I don't know. But John, so now, I had an embarrassing picture earlier, but we also need to see John's embarrassing sweaters from the 1970s.
You see, I'm older, so I grew up, well, it's in the 1970s, not the 1990s, I think, because you're so young. Or whatever.
I'm not that young. So John and I, we have a lot in common. We both taught science. We both have very similar ideas about the way we should do education. But John's face of the flipped classroom and my face of the flipped classroom are different. Part of that is our personalities, because John, you see, does triathlons for fun. This is John last month doing Ironman Arizona. I prefer to make and drink beer. So we're very different in that respect.
And the way that makes us different, I would say, is, I kind of take more of the personal trainer approach. I like to, push it, and Aaron, well, he just likes to drink beer. So
yeah.
We're very different. So the flipped classroom looks different in our classes because of our personalities in many ways.
Yep. So a few of the things, and I'm going to hand a lot of this over to John now, is we want to talk to you about some of the hurdles that teachers have with the flipped classroom. And then we want to tell you briefly why this is working in classrooms around the world. So, John, I've been talking a lot about the change in thinking that I went through as a teacher. And that's kind of what you're being exposed to here. John and I are going to do a workshop this afternoon. We're going to talk to you a lot about the technology component. But there's a piece of time as well. And how do you use your class time? And that's what we want to talk about now, is what is going on in classrooms that is making the flipped classroom effective. So, John.
Right. So there's 4 hurdles, guys. If you want to flip your class, we think there's 4 things you've got to deal with. Number 1, thinking. You've got to flip your thinking about what class looks like. And that's what Aaron did during the first part of this presentation, to convince you that this is a good idea. All right? The second one is technology. There is a technological component. You've got to learn how to use it. Okay? Some of this stuff is crazy easy to use, so you can. Third is there's time. I'm sure many are going, I'm so busy I don't have time to do this. I'm going to argue you don't have time not to do this. This is so transformational, the stories that we're hearing around the world. And I mean, you heard from Tech Millennials Luis this morning, and you're hearing how this is working here in Mexico and around the world. And then it's important that you learn how to do this well, and that you get proper training so that you do it well. So that's so important. And to go back a little bit more to thinking, I believe we have school backwards. We're doing something wrong. We're doing something wrong. What we're doing wrong is we're sending our students home to do the hard stuff. All right? So how many of your parents, you got your own little niños? Yeah, muchos niños. My taxi driver yesterday, I was chatting with him, and he said, 6 niños. I thought, oh, mucho. 3 niños. I said, okay. If you're parents, have you ever had this experience? Have you ever sat at the kitchen table with your son or your daughter, and you're trying to help them on their homework, and they're frustrated? You're frustrated. You want to give up. They want to give up. And this doesn't just apply to little niños. This applies to your niños who are right, who are 19 and 21 years old. That you're sending home and they don't have the help. And that's why the flipped classroom is working, is because what we need to do is rethink the class time so that you can do what Aaron describes, where you do the hard cognitive tasks with the students, because you and you and you and you are the experts. You're the ones who can help them the most. And they go home and they're studying their psychology, they're studying their chemistry, they're studying their literature, and they're going, I don't know. I don't know what to do.
And one of the reasons this is working is because in reality, this is how teachers are using their class time, at least in the United States. So, John, talk to us about Marzano's research.
A couple of months ago, I got to speak at a conference in Washington, D.C., and Dr. Robert Marzano was there. And if you're not familiar with Dr. Marzano, he's one of the leading educational researchers in the world. And Dr. Marzano has 2 million data points. That means that his organization, through an assessment thing that he has, was in 2 million United States classrooms. And this is what he found. He found that class time, 58% of class time was introducing new content, which means primarily lecture. Okay? 36% was practicing new content, or practicing, just kids working. Think of a math class, so they're solving problems. Only 6% of class time was used for more difficult cognitive tasks. 2 million United States classrooms. Now, these are K-12 classrooms. These are not higher education classrooms. But I would bet that the vast majority of universities, the numbers are actually worse than this, would be my guess. I don't know. I'd like to see the stats. I don't know that I have them. And so we have a problem in the world of education, is that we're only taking 6% of our class time to do the more complex cognitive tasks. I was at a conference just last week in Boston, and I had a panel discussion of flipped class teachers. I said, look at this graph and tell me what it looks like in your classroom. You know what they told me? They told me that the 36% was about what they still had for practicing new content, but the orange slice, the 58%, was much, much less, and that allowed for that 6% to grow. You see, we've got to change the paradigm. And in fact, it relates to our second book. Aaron and I wrote 2 books. In our second book, we spend a lot of time talking about another problem we see in the world of education, is that the vast majority of school is all about content. I've got to teach this to my kids, whatever this is, right? It could, like calculus or, engineering or whatever you're teaching. And we forget that there are 2 other aspects to make good teaching good. And that is curiosity and letting kids discover what, they're passionate about. And then this sort of intangible thing, relationships. That old adage that they don't care what you know until they know that you care is so true. I mean, we were dialoguing about this morning, is that the professors that we connected with were the ones who actually took an interest in our lives. Who Aaron describes, had them over to their house for dinner and stuff like that. Just so we have this relationship. Good teaching's about that connection, that human connection from person to person that really matters. And so we think it should really look more like this, where you have kind of an intersection between content, curiosity, and relationship. You want all 3. The sweet spot, of course, is in the middle, where all 3 are intersecting. We still need content, right? There's still stuff we want to teach our students. And that stuff, we know it and they don't, right? We were experts in chemistry and biology for you, and I was astronomy. We know our stuff pretty well, and our students don't. So we have that to offer them, but it needs to be done in the context of relationships and then giving them opportunities to also explore some things on their own. That's the curiosity piece. So Aaron, tell us about some of how we're seeing the flipped classroom growing around
It's
the world.
unbelievable. It's spreading like crazy. I mean, the fact that John and I have had numerous trips to Mexico this year. I've been across the Pacific Ocean 4 times. John's been across once. Ken Bauer down here, he went to Korea earlier this year. It's everywhere. People are really excited because they finally said this is something our teachers can do where they don't have to abandon content. You're still going to do fine on the PISA test, but we can finally get the kids involved in something more engaging than just simply doing practice problem after practice problem after practice problem and listening and spitting back what their teachers are telling them.
Let me tell you a brief story from Korea. When I was in Korea, I got to visit two schools that have had significant number of students who flipped. And as I walked through their classrooms, and I say this was like 6 or 7 teachers, maybe 10, at each school had flipped, so they had many more than 10 or 12. And the thing that was sad, as I walked through this school, is 30% of the students were asleep. They were sleeping at school. These were not in the flipped classrooms, in the non-flipped classrooms, because the teacher was just up there lecturing. And they were just asleep. And when you walked into flipped classrooms, it was just like night and day. The kids were awake. They were doing things. It was just, they were interested. It was engaging. It was such an amazing contrast. And when I talked to the students, when I talked to the teachers, the things that they were saying about the flipped classrooms were the same things that I've heard here in Mexico. They're the same things that I've heard in the United States. They're the same things we've heard when we were in Norway. It is the same thing. So the flipped classroom is working, regardless of whether you're a science teacher or a philosophy teacher or an engineering teacher or a mathematics professor or whatever it might be.
And just so you don't think that you have to copy exactly what I was just talking about, and so you don't think you have to try to make your classroom look exactly what mine did, I asked John this morning, I said, John, where would you put yourself on my chart? And he said, right there. And so that's where I put him. And you might find yourself somewhere else. And these teachers you saw in Korea might find themselves in different areas as well. And you might be teaching in a culture or in a school setting that might confine you right down here. And that's okay. But moving to become the educator that you want to be and using, I think, this idea of making better use of class time to do that is what we want to encourage you to do. How can you take steps toward becoming the educator you want to become? Now, we have to go back to video because the video is an important part of a flipped classroom. But John likes to ruffle people's feathers. So John, ruffle some feathers for us.
I'm going to make a statement. I think this is I'm going to probably be provocative and challenge you. And some of you may not like what I have to say, but I'll say it anyways. If you can be replaced by a YouTube video, you should be. Now hear what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying that teachers should be replaced. I don't say that at all. But if all you are doing is you're a content disseminator, you're giving information to students, you know what? There's already a YouTube video on it. And they can learn it without paying the money to attend the college. We have to add more value. The value of the educator, the teacher, the professional educator, us, the teachers, is, well, doing the more difficult cognitive tasks with our student in the context of a relationship with your students. That is the crux of the matter. So don't just be a YouTube video. Be more than a video. You know, Aaron, I've been here. I came and spoke with you last year, right? Many of you were there. And you came and maybe you were motivated by my presentation last year. And maybe you're motivated today. But I want to kind of leave you with a challenge. I'm going to be that physical trainer, triathlete, go-getter.
I'm going to sit over here and drink a beer.
And he's going to drink beer. But what I'm going to say is now's the time to do it. All right, you've heard about the flipped classroom. Tec de Monterrey has done trainings on the flipped classroom. Now is the time for you to do it. You've just got to say, all right, it's time. I'm going to figure out how, maybe I don't understand the technology. Maybe I don't feel like I have enough time. But now is the time to actually go out and implement this model. That is the key. You can say, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. But if you don't do it, then it was a nice conference and Good luck.
There's a great way to start, and that's find a partner. I don't think John or I, either one of us could have done this alone. The fact that we did this together, we hatched it in room 313 and 314 in Woodland Park, Colorado. We spurred each other on, and when we were tired and worn out and wanted to give up, the other guy would say, no, we got to keep going. We can do this. And when we split up the workload. Work smarter, not harder. Okay, that's an important thing to think about. How can you best use your time? Or what are some things you're doing in your class that you can get rid of, like collecting paper and marking all those all the time? There are ways to get time back, to make time for this, and I'm confident that all of you can do that.
Well, I think the most important thing, though, is we want to finish off with free stuff.
Free stuff is good.
So Ken, do you have a name?
Do you have a name for us? We have 2 books.
Dos. Yeah, dos.
Ken's looking for names. While Ken does that,
I go
John's going to run and get the books. And while he does that, check out flippedclassroom.org. This is a professional learning community of 25,000 educators sharing ideas about the flipped classroom all over the world. Check it out. Join. Share ideas. That'd be awesome. Flippedlearning.org, flippedclass.com as well if you need more training and more information. All right, Ken, who do we got?
Drum roll. Eugenio Salazar. Woohoo!
Are you here? Come on up.
Número 2.